Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 40 of the Nurtured by Nature podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined in conversation by Ricardo, who has dedicated his life to working in the wilderness skills and nature educator space. With mainstream education systems coming under increasing pressure, the systemic issues can no longer be ignored. Necessity is now forcing a change of perspective. With this, an awareness of the benefits for children of being part of nature and forest education programs has been gaining momentum and credibility. Despite our rapidly changing society and the increasing focus on technology and the skills associated with it, Ricardo strongly believes that helping children forge a foundational relationship with nature and the skills you can learn in the wilderness will always be beneficial, providing a natural advantage both during childhood and throughout our adult lives. Education often conditions us to avoid asking questions if we won't have the answer or won't be able to fix the problem. Finding the courage to ask questions and being prepared to sit without a solution allows us to truly connect. To be heard, seen and witnessed is perhaps the greatest space we can hold for others and is equally as important for children as adults. With demands increasing on both children and educators, we also touch on the rising levels of anxiety amongst children and how having these skills and a relationship with nature can be incredibly important, supporting better mental and physical health as well as providing a sense of safety and security to cope with challenging times. We discuss ways that parents and extended families can help offer these opportunities to their children and the importance of community in sharing skills and support. In our hustle culture, we are being conditioned to expect things to be easy, to find the hack and look for the shortcut, but in doing so we are focusing on outcomes without appreciating the rewards on the path. We so often want to change the world and think that it is done in the biggest of gestures, when really it's in the small acts of kindness that the seeds of positive change can germinate. Welcome, Ricardo, and thank you so much for joining us today on this episode of the Nurtured by Nature podcast. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I think you have just an incredible story and a wealth of experience, which I'm looking forward to having you share with my listeners. But just to get us started, I like to just ask all my guests to share a little bit about their nature story. Sometimes I have to prompt my guests, but I've had a good read of your bio, and I think you have an amazing nature story. So I'm sure there's plenty of things that you can share with us to get us started.
Right. I'm really, really pleased to be here too. I love your work, and it's a joy for me also because I run a podcast to be on the other side of the table, so to speak. Well, I was really lucky when I was a child. I had a father and mother who both really enjoyed nature, and I had kind of a childhood of extremes in a way. Like a lot of my earliest memories are being like in the desert, in the Mojave Desert with my father.
Wow. Yeah.
This is like back in like 1969 or something.
Oh my goodness, wow.
I'm just in the desert,
Yeah.
and it's almost like a parking lot with a few like dead bushes in the, spaced out really far, and it's just gravel, and it's like hot, and the sky is kind of silvery, and
Yeah.
you really felt like you were in a science fiction movie because there's nothing to grab onto in your mind, right?
Yeah.
And I remember being in those situations, and then I remember also being like sleeping on the beach in, California, which is where we're from, and feeling the waves pounding, and the fog is really thick, and we're like laying underneath a tarp, and like everybody in the family is like piled on each other trying to stay warm because this is before people realized you need to bring a camping pad.
Yeah.
Keep the cold from you. So we were just freezing. We thought, oh, it'll be fine. We'll sleep on the beach. We were all freezing. But I just, you're hearing like these waves that are just pounding on the sand, 100 yards away, that it just vibrates through the ground, and you can hear seagulls and seals and everything out there. Is very wild. And so, between that and like being in the mountains or the redwood forests, like nature really kind of hit me very, very early on as a child. And and then, parents divorce, you move. I was in upstate New York. All these things start happening. And I became a really avid reader.
Okay.
Taught myself to read very early, and I think it was partly to kind of escape the chaos in my home
Yeah.
at
Yeah,
times,
that makes sense.
And what was interesting about that was that a lot of the stories that I really gravitated towards were the kind of fantasy stories and nature stories about Native Americans and
Okay.
pioneers. And,
Yeah.
if I were to go back and try to find the books that I read, because I read tons of
Yeah.
books, I'm sure that many of them had probably very colonial racist kind of themes because
Yeah, yeah,
they were written
yeah.
from a certain
It was
perspective.
commonplace at the time,
Yes,
it was the culture at the time. And I think there's a power in, not erasing that, but in sort of having the awareness now to look back at it and see what it was, for what it
right.
was. Yeah.
They were really focused on the extremes.
Yeah.
And so I know that probably a lot of it was completely out of it. But I was like so desperate as a kid to I loved anything that was Native American.
Yeah.
I don't know why,
Yeah. Yeah, just it
but
was
I
just a
loved it so
resonant.
much.
Yeah.
So even if I got something that had, 90% of it was baloney that I know was baloney. So I would just read everything I could, and it was really amazing. Because then, like I lived in upstate New York, so I would go out in my backyard, and after reading Call of the Wild, I would have my friends, we would like take turns being tied to the sled and toboggan,
Yeah.
pull it, we would
Yeah.
pretend that we're like Alaskan
Yeah.
gold diggers or something
Yeah.
in the tundra, possibly dying. The snow's like a foot deep and the wind is blowing, and we're
Yeah.
just like, okay, we're living in our imaginations because we're like 11.
Well, I mean, that's
And
the beauty of
yeah,
it, isn't it? Is
yeah.
nature just gives you this amazing place to just use your imagination and creativity and just explore the world and the way you think, isn't it? It's incredible.
It's really true. It's really true. And for most of the time, I was just like living in a fantasy world, wishing that I lived 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And then after I got into, got graduated high school and then was starting to go to college, I discovered this organization in California that teaches people how to like build trails and fight forest fires and plant
Wow,
trees and
okay. Yeah.
do all this kind of like environmental work. And I went up and worked with them for a couple of years, and I was able to like kind of give back. So I was like
Yeah.
helping the
Yeah.
forest after a fire.
Yeah.
I was helping, streams get cleared so that salmon could swim upstream
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
spawn,
Yeah.
and just a variety of things. Sometimes we'd be like building a library, sometimes we'd be going to a local trail and clearing and picking up
Yeah.
trash.
Yeah.
But I really found like giving back was really important to me. And then I discovered that there were some wilderness schools. Right at the time, there was only a couple. There were wilderness survival schools that taught
Okay.
you Native American style survival.
Oh
So it
wow,
was like,
okay. So it
how do
linked
you
the
all
chain.
the bushcraft, everything.
Yeah.
So all
Yeah.
of a sudden, I was just like, what? I actually like when I was like 12, I would read a book, and in that book, it would say it'd be like, oh, here's two children from the Huron tribe in upstate New York or
Yeah.
Canada, and these Hurons would go to the lake, and then his mother would say, "Go get me some basswood to make,
Yeah.
fishing lines so we can go fishing."
Yeah.
When I'm 11 or 12, I'm like, "What's a basswood tree?" I don't
Yeah.
even know if
Yeah.
that's even a real thing.
Yeah.
And then I'm thinking like, and then when I found out what it was, I looked at the tree and went, "Where's the string? Like,
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
bark, right? I don't
Yeah.
know what it
Yeah.
is."
Yeah.
So, they would say, "Oh, yeah, we made fire by friction." And I'd rub sticks together and I go, "There's no fire coming out of this."
Yeah.
So, like, when I start studying with people like Tom Brown and, Frank Sherwood, different people that I started working with, well, they would show me how to use, to make a bow and drill fire
Yeah.
making skill or a hand drill, or they would talk about, here's how you get the fibers from basswood.
Yeah.
Here's how you get the fibers from milkweed and different plants, nettles, and so forth. And all of a sudden, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is actually something you can do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I started learning it because I just liked doing it.
Yeah.
And what was really weird was it was just so fun for me to like sit in the forest with a bunch of nettles or with a bunch of wood and be carving a spoon or making a shelter or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And kids just started showing up.
Yeah.
I don't know how they found me. I mean, this is like in 1984,
Wow. Okay.
85.
Yeah.
So this is pre-internet. The internet was
Yeah.
a twinkle in
Distant.
Al Gore's
Yeah.
eye.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm just sitting there, I had a little campfire or whatever, and I'd be cooking a roasted apple or something.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, like three kids would show up and be like, "What are you doing? Can we do that?"
Yeah.
And I thought, sure, why not? Right. Then I'd get in trouble. The parents would be like, "We've been looking for these three kids for like 6 hours. We're about to call the police. Like, what have you been doing with our kids?"
Yeah.
And I'm just like, they found me. I didn't do
Yeah.
anything. And eventually somebody asked me, hey, do you want to work for our summer camp?
Okay.
And I was like, all right, I might as well formalize it. So I started doing that. And then eventually I kept learning my own wilderness skills and going on my own survival, treks and so forth to learn more myself. But I really enjoyed how these children were like, they were looking at me the way I was wishing that there was somebody to teach me.
Yeah.
Like I would read those
Yeah.
stories from the books, and then I would
But
go, yeah,
not know
I don't
how
know
to
any.
put it into practice or make
Yeah,
it.
I have
Yeah.
nobody. There's nobody to help me like
Yeah.
understand what's going on out here in the woods. I just have this story and I've got nobody to kind of guide me or do anything with. And I
Yeah.
realized like I'm the guy that I always wished had met when I was 12.
Oh, wow.
And so I started working with kids that were 12, and those kids were just like, holy cow, Ricardo taught us how to do this and this and this and this. And it was a really wonderful thing. So I
Yeah.
eventually started my own summer camp, and that was back in the day. I think it was in 1989. And I've run that program plus a lot of other trainings and adult camps and workshops and intensives and college students and everything. And I've done that ever since. So it's been probably 35, 37 years altogether that I've been professionally running things, you know, that have had various impacts on people's lives, and
Yeah.
it's it's been really a wonderful run. So
An
I guess that's the short answer
amazing
or long answer.
journey, and I love that's what I loved about your story was you've become the person that you wish you'd had, and you are able to like just inspire all of these other people and new generations and also similar generations with the love that you nurtured in yourself as a child. And I mean there's so many things in your story that I could talk about, and it's very I think it's a very familiar story for a lot of people that had maybe a little bit of a difficult time in childhood and often found themselves turning to nature as a place of sanctuary and support when there was a bit of upheaval in their
Right,
family life. And that's one of the beauties of nature, isn't it? Is that it is there and available and does provide this space for people. But beyond that, I think what you teach children is well, it's just so important. I mean, your wilderness skills that you teach people just have such an amazing ripple effect in how they can cope with life and also their connection with nature, doesn't it?
right. Yeah, I think so. And I know when I first started teaching, I really wanted to teach in the style of my own people, my mentors and teachers,
Yeah,
and many of them were very intense.
yeah,
They taught adults, and they were like, we're gonna be really intense because we have to kind of penetrate your worldview.
yeah,
And in order to shake that up, you had to really, you know, get really into it. And I started trying to do that, and I realized very quickly that that was not a good way to work with children because
okay,
they could get, like I remember doing a camp that I said I'm going to teach them everything I possibly can. And I remember at the end of that program, children didn't want to leave. They actually stayed until like, it got dark at night in the summer, which was like
yeah,
9 o'clock at
yeah,
night.
yeah,
And I was, the parents had picked them up at like noon.
yeah,
And I kept going back and forth doing all my chores because I had another program coming. And I kept seeing the parents with the children and or with, and I'd say, where are your kids? Aren't you guys heading home? And they're like, no, they're going to go up and see their shelter one last time, and then they're going to go
Oh,
swimming, and then
yeah.
we went and got a pizza to come back because they still want to be with their friends and talk and so forth. And I'm like, you guys go home, right? And then, I got a call like after the second day from one of the moms, and she said, Ricardo, will you talk to my daughter? She's up in a tree and she won't come home. She won't come in. And I'm like, what is she doing in a tree? And she was just like, she just misses camp and she wants to be in nature, and
Yeah.
she doesn't want to let go of that. And I was like, I got on the phone with her. I was like, hey, get out of the tree. Let's go. Like
Yeah.
your family loves you. It's
Yeah.
gonna be
Yeah. Yeah.
but that's when I realized like I was going a little bit too far
Okay.
because I created such a deep experience that they couldn't actually bring it back and integrate it
Yeah, I was going to say it's the
into their
integration,
lives.
isn't it? Into like, it almost became too much of a shock to their system to
Right.
try and go back to reality.
Right. A lot of these children were living in suburbia,
Yeah,
in suburban homes. And, I mean, that's kind of depressing if you're like in the wilderness and you're like, I'm
yeah,
living in like the Lord of the Rings and everybody's like
yeah,
loving everybody and having fun. And you have all these friends. And then you go back and you're just like, there's no real nature to go
yeah. And
explore.
there's just
And
noise and just the energy and
yeah.
things is, I mean, it's quite a buzzword people say, but I'm an empath, and I find like large sort of concentrations of people quite difficult to
Mhm.
experience because it's like there's just so much stimuli coming at
Sure.
you, and it's taken me quite a long a long time in my life to like find a way to actually sort of manage that. And I can really empathize with these children going and having this incredible experience with you in nature, and then going home and being like, wow, I got and not
Right.
wanting to integrate back into it as well, because it doesn't feel as nurturing to your soul as well.
That's really true because, there's such a big contrast. It helped me later when I started traveling to their communities
Yeah,
because I would just say, you know what, I'm going to go down and see where these kids live. Where are they coming from?
yeah,
And it was helpful because when I got there, I was like, oh, wow. Yeah, they're living in a world that's almost completely man-made,
yeah,
and they don't have what I have. So in my, when I was younger, I was just like, well, everybody's kind of the same and everything,
yeah,
I live up here in the woods. It's very rural. Therefore, what I'm doing isn't that big of a deal
yeah,
compared to my daily life. But for them, it wasn't. So
yeah,
I had to start really, we had to like really look at, and I mean, I say we, mostly it was me just saying like, all right, well, how do you integrate
yeah,
after a really deep experience? I was just like, for the first like 5 days or 4 days of a program, I would like not talk about baseball or
yeah,
movies or anything like that with the children because I want them to like really feel connected to and be present with the campfire and with
yeah,
each other and with our stories and so forth. But then like by Thursday or Friday, I'm asking them like, oh, what are you going to do next week? Or
yeah,
hey, do you guys have a dog? Do you miss your dog? Hey, do you have a little brother?
yeah.
Hey, are you going to go see any movies? Are you excited about? Like, I was trying to like let them
Gently,
know that
yeah,
like both I know that there's another world out there
yeah.
besides the one that we're living in right now.
You could be part of
And
both. I think that's the thing, isn't it? Is finding that way that they could have both. It wasn't an either or, it was a way to integrate both together.
right, I was trying to validate that world. So I'm like, it took me a while to understand that, my experience of what I was doing with them wasn't about me, it was about them.
Yeah,
So that helped my program grow because I viewed it less of a bushcraft program, but it was a bushcraft program to them. And
yeah,
that was good. Like I wanted them to think I'm coming to camp to learn how to make a fire and
yeah,
take care of myself in the forest. But what I was really trying to do was to say, how do I create a human develop? How do I develop leadership and build this inner foundation for them
yeah,
with kind of partnering them with nature and then giving them these challenges and skills that no one can take away from you. If you learn how to make a fire without matches or build a
yeah,
shelter and get through a rainstorm or, make these little accomplishments, I mean, it just builds your confidence so much. when you can do those things. And many times I think children just go like, I want to find a way to feel good about myself. How do I do that?
Yeah. I think
And
that's a huge
yeah,
thing, isn't it? Well, it's not just children, is it? I think
no, no.
I think for all of us,
Hmm.
we live. I mean, it comes back to education again, isn't it? And I think more and more there's so much, certainly in this country, there's so much pressure on children to perform and succeed in formal education and school, and it's really intense for them. And there is this sense of like you have to achieve, and if you're not achieving then you're failing, and everything that becomes part of your identity as a result of that. So yeah, I think like having those little wins and feeling like you have
Yeah,
achieved something is huge, and it's something that stays with you through your life. I mean, I know that you did a little you did one of the TED Talks, and your lovely example in that that you talked about then was how the impact of I think it was a boy that had been on one of your programs, not just once but twice, but and how it just had this beautiful ripple effect. I remember just being really like moved by how it changed his life, but also impacted his community. It was fantastic.
yeah, yeah. No, that's really true. It's what's interesting about like my perspective now as I look at things that I've experienced and seen my students experience. Most of the people that have I've taught, you teach them, they show up, you do your experience, and then they go, and you never really know what
Yeah,
happened.
yeah,
So, I have lots of stories, but there are thousands of stories, that I don't know anything
yeah,
about what
yeah,
that effect was. But when I do have a good story or any story that I can share about it, it's really those anecdotal stories that really move people. And at the same time, I'm also acutely aware that anecdotal stories are also not the end. Like there
yeah,
is this whole idea of getting quantitative data over
yeah,
many years. And I've always wanted to get more data, but I've never had the time and or funding. I mean, costs
yeah,
thousands of dollars or create, there's a whole process of learning how to get more of that. So that's what I'm really excited about in the field of nature education now, is that we're actually getting the data to back up the
yeah.
things that we already know. And hopefully that is beginning to make an impact
Yeah, I think
for
it's a really
schools and
exciting
everything.
time in a lot of these fields where like there's people have almost you've had to sort of go on just like your belief and your faith and your feeling for all of these years, and you've seen the experience yourself, and that's kept you going. But for the sort of outside people, there hasn't been the data
Right,
to really sort of back you up and support you. And with the rise of technology, with the rise of the internet, it is there is it's an, for me it's an exciting time to see like science kind of really just having the opportunity to expand into all of these fields, and there's so much that we can still learn, and it's just an exciting time to finally be able
right.
to quantify it.
It's really true. I mean, what's weird in the United States is people don't like to change.
Yeah.
And I
I
mean,
think I
maybe
think
that's
that's
it
mostly
might not
true
might not
everywhere.
be true in where you are, but I'm just saying. Uh,
I
but the
no,
idea
I'd
is
agree. I think most
highly
people don't like
resistant.
change. I think
No,
that's I think we get very set in our ways, don't we? Quite, we get rigid in our our
yeah.
structure and approach and beliefs.
But so in America, what happens is that you can say, "Hey, we really have this cool thing that we're doing. We'd love to try it out in schools and see how if that would work." And the schools will say, "Well, we like to only do things that are data driven,
Yeah,
and so, we don't want to pilot something that and take the risk. And what if it doesn't work out?
yeah.
So we want it to be data driven." And then you go and you get the data, and then they go, "Yeah, we're still not sure." Like, you know
Yeah,
what I mean? Like, because
yeah,
there's
yeah,
data that says in America they're saying that it would be better for teenagers, older children, to wake up and go to school later. If they went to
Yeah.
school 2 hours later, it would be better for them. They would have better outcomes, better everything.
Yeah.
And that's been proven. That's like a real statistic that
Yeah.
that would improve education. Statistically, it works, but they don't want to do it. So they're
Yeah.
just not going to do it. So even when they get the data, there can be still, they'll be moving at a glacial level or not at all. They'll be like,
Yeah.
well, we'll talk about that in the next meeting. We'll talk about it in the next meeting. No, there's no real push by anybody to
Yeah.
make that change happen. So what happens with nature and everything else is that it oftentimes becomes up to the parents to say,
Push
we
for
want
things.
this.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and the other thing that's been happening now is that in America, since the pandemic, there were a lot of students that, stayed home from school and they had to do distance learning,
Yeah. Yeah. We had
on
the same
Zoom
over
and
here.
everything.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of students that just decided we're going to become homeschooled because we don't want to deal with the computer all the time.
Yeah.
And then there's some students that just, even after the pandemic, they just didn't come back. Like the level of kids that are absent from classrooms is skyrocketing. It's huge.
Yeah.
And then the students that do come to school oftentimes have behavioral
I
issues
was going to say,
where,
do you see the issues with anxiety? I know
yes.
it's been a huge thing over here. I've amongst my friends and circle and things I've heard is just this huge level of anxiety that children have got since, particularly, I don't know if it's really just since the pandemic or just there's been more awareness. And I think
Mhm.
perhaps like similar to what we were talking about earlier about, like, they had this sort of culture shock of like you originally said with the kids coming on your summer camp, and then like, how do I integrate back into the world? I guess it's a similar situation to that. And I think we're just really like more and more seeing an awareness that our education systems just aren't serving our children to set them up for the future. And I think that's what's
Right.
so powerful about what you're doing, and the approach that you take is, you're looking at the situation and you're looking for solutions to it. You've got this beautiful openness, like you were saying. It's like you're open to change, you're open to tweaking things. You might have an idea initially of like, oh, I should do it this way, but you're like, oh, I see the results, that's not having the results I want, so I need to adapt and change, which of course is nature, isn't it? That
Sure.
that's how
Sure.
nature
Exactly.
reacts. Yeah.
Right. Right. Well, and that's what happens in schools too, is they're finding that students are showing up and they have incredible levels of anxiety. They have behavioral issues. There's a lot of things going on,
Yeah.
in a lot of systemic ways.
Yeah.
Teachers underpaid and, just parents that are, unreasonable or whatever in different ways that create a lot of friction. And so they're really struggling. So they're more open now because they're like,
Yeah.
you know what? The things that we have been doing are actually not working at all.
Yeah.
And we're losing teachers, we're losing children, nothing good is happening. So they're much more open to bringing people who have forest school
Yeah.
experience or nature program experience and saying, please come out and work with us for a couple days a week, do things, because they're more open because of necessity. They're being
Yeah.
forced to
Yeah.
change.
Yeah.
And that is, in some ways that's hopeful, and in some ways I'm also kind of sitting back and looking at the whole situation and going, well, if I was an educator, working independently, and I'm working with 20 parents who love what I do and the kids love what I do, and I'm outside of the system, why would I want to go into a public system where I'm going to get underpaid? The
Yeah.
parents are going to, be upset at times, and the administration won't back me up. And I'm going to have kids that are resistant and
Yeah.
stressed out.
Yeah.
Like I'm kind of going into something that's really dysfunctional, and you
Yeah.
go, why would I want to do that? Unless there was really very, very clear protections in place, very clear boundaries, right? And so that's the piece that I'm kind of like thinking a lot about right now, because
Yeah.
I focus a lot on the educator side of it, and I say, Yeah, are you sure you want to go in there? Not that you don't want to go in there because the children are awesome and
Yeah.
they need our help. But what do they say about, like, if you're a first responder, they're like, you can't go in and help someone and rescue them from being electrocuted if you're also going to be electrocuted,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
Or if
Yeah.
you're not safe. So if you're not safe and going in there, pretty soon you're the one that's going to now be need to be rescued.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's where I think we're at right now in some ways, systemically, in a big picture way. But I always tell parents and anyone that, takes care of younger children, to say that there's no future in this life coming, this life that we're in right now, this state and
Yeah.
time in humanity. There's no future in which our children having a strong connection to the natural world is not going to be an advantage,
Yeah.
right? There's
Yeah.
no future. It's better for your health, your mental health, your level of leadership, communication, your sense of well-being. All of those things are enhanced so much that it's almost like I don't want to say, yeah, I don't want to be too extreme, but I'm just saying, like, you're doing a very, very strong disservice
Yeah.
if you're not helping your child get that connection.
Yeah,
And
yeah, I completely agree with you. I think I've heard you share quite a shocking statistic about the amount of like screen time that children have now. Is it something like eight hours plus a day or something that they're in front of
yeah,
their
it varies
screens?
up and down and
Yeah.
depends on who does the study. I don't know what it is now. I haven't really paid attention to it now because it's so disturbing, and yet it's
Yeah.
also just like standard. And it's not just children, but
Well, yeah.
adults, right?
It's
But
our society, isn't it, really?
we're all,
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of like we're unprepared. We're unprepared for how addictive some of our devices are. It's like if we did, like, heroin or something. You went, all right, hey, let's try it. Oh, you have the new version of, you have
Yeah.
heroin 5.0.
Yeah.
Let's check that out. And then,
It
it's
it
like,
is, but
you
it's
don't really know.
I like the fact that you've likened it to a drug because I think we need to, it's kind of a shocking thing to say to people, but it is an addiction. There's certain addictions in society that we find acceptable and we're happy to allow people to do.
Right.
And there's certain addictions that we are like, no, that's really wrong. You shouldn't do that. But yeah, I mean, I even in my life, I mean, I'm only just sort of in my early 40s and I'm like, in my life, I've gone from like, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have mobile
No.
phones, we had,
Yeah.
four channels on our TV, and like it was,
Right. Right.
we got the news at like 6 and 9 p.m. and it's like, and it's just this huge shift in, quite, I mean, I think in all honesty, the internet really is like the last 20 years, it's really taken hold and become like much more important part of our lives. We now have these devices in our pockets 24/7 that are like,
Sure.
tapping us into information around the world.
No, it's very true that that's the case. And I mean, don't get me wrong, like, I love technology.
Yeah. Well,
I
we
I
talked a
like, I'm
little bit
so
earlier
grateful.
about how it,
Yeah.
helps with your data gathering, how it helps connect people all around the world, how we can learn more from each other. So yeah, there's huge positives, but it's like trying to find that balance, isn't it, of what you can do.
That's true. And this, so the thing I think about a lot is, I really don't spend a lot of time going like, oh, your phone is bad, because I don't want people to think that devices and screens and stuff are inherently bad, because they're not. But the problem is that when they start to fill the gaps that could
Yeah.
be filled with nature, caring relationships,
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
learning, leadership development, and all that, when it infiltrates and takes over those, then at that point you it's now crossing over, right? So
Yeah.
you can still like look up anything in 5 seconds, you can still do all these other things, but because you're losing that the actual real time doing that, then that becomes a problem. So the answer that I always say to parents too is, if you want your child to have that connection to nature, it's up to you. Don't If you wait for the school to try to do
Yeah.
it, your kid is going to be in college before your school is actually going to like have a meaningful nature program.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you want your child to get those things, or your grandchild, or your best friend's, your goddaughter, or whoever it is that you care about,
Yeah.
if you wait, pretty soon they'll be 14 and they won't care and they won't want to do anything with you.
Yeah.
So, I mean, hopefully they will, especially if you're going taking them ice cream or something, they'll go. But the point is that you have this narrow window from the time they're, born till probably about 11,
Yeah.
where they will go with you, they will do whatever you want to do for the most part, and you can actually just
Yeah.
take them to the waterfall. You can take them to the mountain, you can take them to the spring, you can take them to the forest, to the ocean. You could take them and they'll go because they're like, hey, I want to go with you
Yeah.
because you're an adult and we're going to have fun. And once you lose that window, it may not come back around again. And at that point, now you're not dealing just with, hey, I want to take my 20-year-old to the park, but now you're saying, I'm going to take my 20-year-old and see if I can, now they're having a problem with alcohol, or now they're
Yeah.
having a problem with depression or
Yeah.
anxiety.
Yeah.
And now at that point, when it's a problem, nature isn't going to be just the only solution. And so now you're going to have this whole battle of like, how are we going to deal with this? So it's like, if you can avoid that by, I mean, yes, like, let's be real. I'm almost 60. Do I want to get up every day and then go for a walk in the park and then take my kid? Like, I don't always want to do that because
Yeah.
I'm tired and I don't feel like it and
Yeah.
whatever. But I'm going to tell you, you're either going to work really hard now, or you're going to work really hard later. And the chances of good outcomes coming later are much, much higher,
Yeah.
and devastating to families.
Yeah.
Like, the level of like suicide among children is skyrocketing. Depression that requires a lot of medication,
Yeah.
bipolar, anxiety, manic panic attacks. I mean, there's a
Yeah.
long list of things that we're struggling with, and it's ultimately cultural. There's a system that
Yeah.
we're in that's
Yeah.
not working. These are symptoms of the
Yeah,
problem.
I think that
But
that's the thing, isn't it? It's we are seeing these. I like the term you use there, symptoms. I talk quite a lot to sort of holistic health practitioners as well. And one of the things that we say when we about symptoms is like they're messages from the body. And in this case,
yes,
they're messages from our society to say, hang on a minute, like something we're doing is just not being of service to like being maintaining health and humans being able to function and remain healthy as they should. And I
right,
think it is it's a difficult one because you touched on it earlier. We have to go to this almost extreme, don't we, for change to start. And I'm hopeful that we're sort of getting to that point where, like, sadly, people are suffering, which no one wants, particularly children. We don't want to have
right,
to see the children struggling with anxiety, with, suicide and things. I mean, no one wants to hear or see that at all. And I think that's where, I mean, I love your podcast, and I would highly recommend people to check it out. I think it's the Forest Educator podcast, isn't it? And
mhm,
you talk to amazing guests from all around the world, but just to, like you said, it's a time where as individuals we need to step up, to educate ourselves, to learn a bit more, to give ourselves tools, really, I think, which is really what your whole program is about,
right,
really. I think,
right,
your whole sort of approach to life and your program is this almost beautiful metaphor for actually our lives and our society. And it's like, if we can just approach life more in the way that you have, and it's about community as well. I think that's the other big key that often comes up for me and my guess is just the power of community. And I think you touched on it when you were talking about screen time and how we're losing this sort of connection to real people. And it's through community that we can actually strengthen, isn't it? And I think that's the other
Yeah.
side of what you're doing and what you create is this community. And I think when you were talking about how do forest educators go into these sort of broken systems but protect themselves, it's by having this beautiful support network of other forest educators that they can sort of fall back on and have that support. Because that's what we needed. We need all of these people to, they need to look after themselves because you've got to maintain yourself, haven't you? And nature is also a beautiful place to do that, which is the skill that you're trying to impart for the younger generations and parents and things is like nature might not be on your doorstep if you're, in a more urban environment. You might have to go a little bit further afield. But then also, there are aspects of nature that are quite often around most of us, even in more urban environments.
Mhm.
There's trees and small little pockets, and you might have to work a little bit harder, but you can find that connection with nature, and it can be a huge support for you as well.
Right. That's really true. And what's really interesting is that when parents actually get involved in doing those things, then they get the benefit too.
Yeah,
So
yes.
you actually in the beginning you're like, I don't want to go or whatever, but then you go and you're like, oh my gosh, we saw this incredible experience. We had this great experience, and we
Yeah,
were just outside, and I didn't think about my work for 15 minutes, and we had a good time. And then afterward, like I always say, make sure you go and get something. If you can tie doing nature stuff with like getting something that's a treat, like
yeah,
going and getting some type of good food or doing something you really like to do, and you combine that, then that makes it a little bit easier,
yeah. To
just
become
so
a
that you
habit.
can,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah. And I'm always a big fan too of saying, like, whatever you do in the beginning, make sure it's really positive. Like, don't take
yeah.
children out and go, yep, we're going out in nature, and then go out there and there's like mosquitoes and
It's
bugs and
raining and
it's
yeah, the
raining, or
cold
it's like
and
really,
yeah,
really hot or whatever.
yeah,
Like, pick when it's going to be good and pleasant, and
yeah,
build up a bank of memories
yeah,
of it being mostly good, and then figure it out as you want to start easy.
yeah,
And because you don't, if you start and you have a really negative experience, then that can like end it. But I would say that if you can build that into your routine, you're going to see the benefits. And I have parents that will swear, like that. I have stories of parents where they said, oh, my daughter's best friend, when she was 13, they had a huge fight, and they had they were best friend, like literally best friends, spent every day riding together on the school bus,
yeah,
going and doing stuff, playing at each other's house, doing everything. And then all of a sudden they had a huge fight. And her mom called me and said, Ricardo, I just want you to know my daughter's in the backyard, and she just had a huge fight with her best friend. It looks like everything's just done. And she said, I've just been like so worried because the other mom called me and said, you better, just so you know, this happened. I'm really scared. My daughter's freaking out because what do we do? How do you replace that close relationship?
yeah,
And
yeah,
she said, my daughter, your camper, like she's in the forest, she's in the woods in our backyard, just building a fire in her, like there's a little fire pit that they had in this
yeah,
little like
yeah,
backyard they have. And she's like making a fire, and she's cooking her dinner, and she's just like carving with her knife that she got at your camp. And she's okay. She's
yeah,
not happy, but she's okay. Like
yeah,
nature is going to still be there for her, even if, things go south with your relationships and everything else. You're still going to have that. I think that's kind of why pets in today's world are so important, right? People are
yeah,
just like, I will do anything for my pet
yeah,
because my pet's there for me.
yeah, yeah,
And nature is kind of that same way. And she just said, like, I've seen my daughter go through things that all these other kids that they know in the neighborhood go through. And she said, my daughter doesn't have a problem. They are all, oh, we're going to go to a therapist. Oh, we're going to, we're just having like a horrible time because they didn't have that inner foundation.
yeah,
And, and so, and I mean, I'll be honest, like I didn't really think that anxiety was that big of a deal because I'd never had
Yeah,
anxiety, really.
yeah,
And I think during the pandemic, I don't know, I was probably reading on the wrong websites about the, disease or whatever. And I remember after, it was like a couple years into it, but I just remember feeling a little bit overwhelmed. And then I had this really, really scary feeling.
yeah,
And I didn't really know what it was. And I was like, I think I'm having like a panic attack.
yeah,
And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like so uncomfortable. Like I was so uncomfortable, both like
yeah,
mentally and physically,
yeah,
that at that moment, I was both like in it as a human being going, this is horrible. And then I was also a part of me, my brain was like,
witnessing it
if there
almost.
was a way
Yeah,
for me to
yeah,
not feel what I'm feeling right now, I
yeah,
would take it. Like I
yeah,
don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't do any drugs. But I
yeah,
was just like, oh my gosh, I almost am at a point where I could take almost anything to not feel this
yeah,
feeling.
yeah,
And luckily, I'm fairly well read. So I was like, oh, I've read that cold packs are really helpful to
yeah,
break that, break the racing mind. So I like stuck a cold pack in my neck and then
yeah,
I put a meditation app on and I just like listened to that.
yeah,
And literally in like 15 minutes, I felt 100 times better.
yeah,
And I'm very lucky. I'm not saying I'm an authority now because I had that, but I didn't understand how uncomfortable it was. And I'm just telling you, if you have a kid who's 10 or 11 or 12 and they're starting to feel those panic feelings, oh my gosh, like they will turn to anything that
yeah,
will help them not feel that. And they won't care whether it's
yeah.
good or bad for them because they won't have any choice. It's so uncomfortable.
Yeah, you
So
just want it to end. It's just
yeah,
anything to, n numb it out, just literally sort of put that pause button on it and just be able to function. And I think that's like what you're saying is it's by there's something you were saying earlier, and I was thinking about
uh-huh.
basically, nature is incredibly resilient. I think we have a huge amount of bad news about the environment and nature and the state of nature, which has quite an overwhelming impact on, I think, particularly the younger generations as well. I think that's, it's being framed in such a way that they are losing hope. And I think they're carrying this very heavy burden that they're tapping into like from society. And I think that's also not helpful for them. But it's nature is incredibly resilient. I mean, I've had some amazing guests that I've talked to, and they're like, they've been involved in like rewilding projects and things, and they're like, it's incredible. Like, if you give nature a bit of space and a bit of time, and not even necessarily a huge amount of support, but just that space and time, in a relatively short space of time, like 10 years, it's like
Oh yeah.
flourishing and thriving and incredible. And I think, you know, as humans, the humans we are incredibly resilient. But I think with that comes this big weight of responsibility to realize that, like, you can still, like, be almost broken by it. And that's what I think a lot of the children are struggling with now is this weight of it, isn't it? And it is manifesting
Yeah.
in anxiety. And like you said, if you've never experienced anxiety, then you don't know how it's suffocating. It's literally like, you're gonna do anything. And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
trying
it's
to
true.
have this place of non-judgment in the choices that they are making because they don't have the tools. And I think really that's what you're saying is like what you provide them is the tools. And that lovely example that you shared there was like this teenage girl. I mean, I was a teenage girl. Your best friends, that's your safety, your security. You're going
Right. That's
out
your
into the
family.
world.
That's your real family, right?
Yeah, and
In
and
some
then
ways.
that's blown apart, and you've got that taken away from you, and you're like, and
Yeah. Who are you
you've
then?
yeah, and you've got this, our nature is you don't want, it's not safe to be alone. It's not safe to
Hmm.
be alone. So if you've lost contact with your community, you're now sort of ostracized. That kind, that's the sort of the feelings that are going on. Like, how do you cope with that? And it's
Well, you
it's
probably go to
one
like a lodge in Africa or something, right?
yeah, yeah, well, pretty much. Yeah, that's pretty much what I did. Yeah, a little bit extreme, couple of
Oh, my best
thousand
friend doesn't want to
miles.
play Monopoly. I'm out of here.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm off to the real wilderness.
Exactly.
I'm,
Exactly.
I'm gonna go and play barefoot with
Right.
the elephants in, but
That's right.
but
I'll show you.
yeah, but
Yeah. Isn't that
it
true?
yeah, it is. It's just it is really. I think. I mean, I didn't. I wouldn't say I'm quite intelligent, so I did quite well in school.
Hmm.
Um, but I didn't enjoy it. Like it was hard. It was a challenge. It was like for me, it was like probably the hardest wilderness that I had to actually try and navigate. And
100%. Yeah.
it was quite a relief to be to be in nature with animals. And I'm like, I understand the rules of their game. Like I
Yes.
can play it. And yeah,
Yeah, that's really true. And I think like I mean, I'm the same way. I really there was a part of me that loved learning, but I
yeah,
didn't like the social, like the system itself was flawed in a way that
yeah,
was not comfortable. And so when I found nature as well, I was like, hey, you know what? I'm not going to be Mr. Academic. I'm going to pursue what I love. But I know that, regardless of that, like I always think like students, we just want to give them those tools, right? I
yeah,
look at everything you're saying and I say, you know, just going to nature is awesome.
yeah,
So if you go on a walk 3 or 4 times a week and you go out there and you just see what you see and have a good time,
yeah,
that itself is really powerful.
yeah,
Then if you combine that with actually learning real skills,
yeah.
like if you can combine or add, you maybe separately even, if you can learn a real skill, like whether it's gardening or woodworking or some kind of craft, knitting,
Something
something.
you do with your hands is also
Yes.
really good.
A simple skill that you can learn that will help you improve your life. Being able to, like, I would do that work with children in after school programs, and I would just go, all right, you guys are going to learn, you're going to learn how to do, make really, really healthy food that's really fast, that
Yeah,
everybody's going to love. And so if I can give you like 5 recipes and, you're going to learn how to make a fruit salad, how to make like a Mexican quesadilla that's unbelievable. You're going to learn how to make like ramen noodles, which are cheap, but you're going
yeah,
to make it so it's like a deluxe thing people are going to
yeah,
crave later. Like if I can teach you how to make 5 or 6 things, you will be known in your whole family as the person to be the cook, and you're going to feel really good about that
yeah,
because you're
yeah,
you're feeding them not just food, but you're feeding them with how your presence is, and
yeah,
you're going to get something from that. And I try to say, like, whatever those skills are, nobody can take those away from you. And they build that resilience inside because some of those skills are hard to learn and you're going to make mistakes, right? You're going to make a
yeah,
cake and it's going to be horrible.
yeah,
And you're like, okay, I guess I'll never forget to, switch the salt and the sugar or something.
yeah,
But you're going to learn. And as you learn and figure it out, you get the rewards for that. And then that teaches you how to handle the problems that you have later in life
yeah,
that are even more stressful or scary. And then the other part is that whole element of like being able to find somebody who you can connect with in an authentic relationship, like a real
yeah,
mentor or like someone who actually can listen to you. Like,
yeah.
I don't know, so many times there's parents, they pick the kids up at summer camp and they're just like, hurry up, get in the car, get in the Volvo. We got to go pick up your brother at, this other nature camp. And then we got to go here and drop off your sister here. And
Yeah.
so they're not really in a place to like
They're
say, oh,
busy. They're
yeah,
busy,
they're going to just kind of go like, oh, how
yeah.
was your camp? And then you start sharing and they're like,
Oh,
oh
that's
yeah,
nice.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
by the way, get me a
Yeah.
sandwich out of the back seat. And you're just
Yeah.
like, okay, they really aren't paying attention to me. And
Yeah.
you've just been in the woods with a bunch of people that have really paid
Paid
attention.
attention. Yeah.
And you need someone to be able to then say, like I always tell the parents, like, hey, if you can pick up your daughter or son, go have a little cafe somewhere and have
Yeah.
a really nice lunch. Don't be rushed and just
Yeah.
talk to them about, hey,
What
what
they
did you
did.
learn? Or what was
Yeah.
something that was fun? Or anything you can, but really try to go to their speed because if you can validate their experience, then it's like the perfect triangle, right? I call it like the natural advantage. So it's like it's not just nature, it's also learning skills, and it's also about having a chance to have a bonding. And
Yeah.
if you just have nature and skills, that's awesome. But if you don't have anybody to bond with, then you're at risk, right? If you
Yeah.
have good nature and you're bonding, but you don't have any life skills, you're at risk, right?
Yeah.
If you're good at skills and bonding, but you don't have nature, you're also missing a way to
Yeah.
center yourself and everything. So it really does take those elements that build that inner foundation. And
Yeah.
that's kind of what I mean, I don't really talk about this aspect of it that much, not on my podcast really, because it's mostly
Yeah.
about everybody else. But
Yeah.
man, it's
I
to
think,
me, that's the only solution. And finding the ways to develop that,
yeah.
I don't know.
I
I
think,
mean, we're
yeah.
figuring it out, but ultimately, those things can be figured out in your family. Like
Yeah.
there's somebody who knows some skills that can help your son or daughter. There's
Yeah.
somebody who has the time to bond. If you're super busy, you could still drop them off at Aunt, Aunt Carol's house
Yeah.
or, Uncle Charlie or something.
Yeah.
And they will have time to take your son or daughter fishing or
Yeah.
working on a car or, something, right?
I think
Um,
it, it is that, I mean, it's something I've been reflecting on recently actually about podcasting, and part of why I love podcasting so much is because it's this I get to sit here, like we've been sat here for like just over an hour, and we're both fully present with each other. There's not distractions. We haven't got, a phone that's buzzing telling us we need to be here, there, or otherwhere, everywhere. We haven't got email notifications coming in, and it's really rare. It's really rare in our society now to have these like moments of like actually like full connection and presence with
mm,
people. And that's really what I feel like when you were talking about bonding. That was what was feeling, was this, the sense of actually just like slowing down and listening. Like when you ask someone a question, listen to what they're saying, what their answer is. And it's a skill that I don't know, we're losing a little bit because society is putting so much demand on us and on our time, the expectation that we, are constantly on call. We've got to reply to emails, we've got to reply to messages. If your boss is like, why, that email's been sat there for 30 seconds and I haven't had your reply. And it has become really hard for people. And I completely, something that a guest said to me recently, she was like, it might be simple, but it's not easy. And
no,
that's the thing. It's like, it isn't easy. It is hard. It is simple, but it's not easy to do. And you've got to be prepared to have a bit of grace with yourself. You're not going to be
yeah,
perfect. There's going to be times when you can't turn up, and you might sit there later and go, oh, I should have, paid a bit more attention to what they were saying, but you do the best you can. And I think, conversations like this, hopefully they sow the seed to raise awareness with people.
hmm
And that's really the biggest first step, is if you start to just have that little bit of awareness of things, then you start to, just be able to catch yourself and think, oh, hang on, could I do something a little bit better in this moment than what I would have
yeah,
done previously? And yeah, we start, and also in that connection, you have these beautiful spaces for collaboration and and learning from
true.
each other as well. And there's so much wisdom out there that you can tap into.
That's really true. I have there's a friend of mine, and he talked to me a while ago, and he said, "Hey, Ricardo, I really want to help change the world a little bit, but I don't have a lot of time. Like, what could I do?" And I said, "Well, what do you like to do?" And he liked cooking and he liked, doing things, but he didn't have a lot of like wilderness skills or anything. And I said, "Well, what do you have?" And he said, "Oh, I have a nice house in the country and I have a big backyard, that overlooks the mountains and everything." And I said, "Well, why don't you just have like a campfire around, and your yard, and just like once a month do like a potluck and invite people, have a chance for people to sit and visit." And
Yeah.
Not really make it a party, but maybe there's a little theme or something that you could do. So he started doing that, and he, wrote to me, this is a few years ago, and he was like, Ricardo, it's working really well. These people are coming, they're so grateful. And and he would message me at times, and he would say, sometimes I do this and I'm like, why am I doing this? Some of the people are really annoying. They like our tolerance, right? Our tolerance
Yeah.
for people with other opinions.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I said, that's true. He was just complaining that it was work, right? And I said,
Yeah.
this is the work. It's not like, what can I do that will just make everything perfect
Yeah.
and you'll be able to just do the minimum. I said,
Yeah.
that's not how it is with kids. I work with kids. And he's like, yeah, Ricardo, it's different because you're with kids. It's all fun or whatever. And I'm like, no, it's not. Like, at the end of a day, I'm like exhausted. And then there's one child that's like, I miss my dad and my mom and I want to go home and everything. And you're like, okay, I've got a homesick kid, and you're going to be sitting with that kid for an extra hour
Yeah.
trying to get them to go to sleep. And they're
Yeah.
exhausted, you're exhausted.
Yeah.
Or you're going to have something go wrong, or you're going to have a day where it's going to rain might rain for 3 days. Everything that you had planned, you have to scrap and do something completely different. And
Yeah.
you're pulling your hair out,
Yeah.
trying to figure out how to make it fun. Or sometimes there's kids that don't get along and you have to figure out.
Yes.
I said, there's always something when it comes to human beings.
Yeah.
And it's great if I said, you can have a party. If you don't want any conflict, just invite like 3 people. But I said, you're still going to have something, because after a while, those 3 people will get on your nerves too, because everybody is going to figure,
Yeah.
we're all trying to figure it out. He kind of like thought about that a lot, because he was thinking like, yeah, you're right. It is work. And I said, and that's your gift to them. The gift
Yeah.
isn't the campfire. The gift isn't whatever food you guys have and your backyard and your beautiful space, but it's also, you're giving them the grace of
Yeah.
being present with them and communicating with them really honestly. But it really helped him to understand. I'm like, it is work. Like, don't get me wrong. If you're taking your child to the waterfall or whatever it is, it's going to be work.
Yeah.
Like, there's stuff that's going to happen. Or
Yeah.
if
And
you're
I
making
think
a birdhouse or whatever, it's like, you're going
I
to be
think we've
sweating and who knows.
we've kind of been misdirected, haven't we, in this little, like, we've got this sort of hustle culture, but we're also like, we're always looking for the shortcut, the quick fix to
Right.
things.
The
Gee,
hack, right? The
yeah,
hack.
the hack. Yeah. How do
These
I
5
hack this?
hacks will help you live a perfect life. You're like, okay,
Yeah. And
doesn't really work like that,
it's
but
like, actually, do you know
sure.
what? If it's worth doing, with full in, let's go full out on life, and
Right.
show up and turn up and realize it's not going to be easy. There's times when we're going to be like, we're not perfect. We're going to get irritated by people. We might not behave in the best
Yes.
representation of ourselves, but you know it I mean, we were talking just before we started, and we were saying, like, it's about your intention though as well, and like coming from the right, sort of a heart space, really. You wanting, like your friend,
Yes.
he wanted to do good. He was like, how can I change the world? And the thing is, it's like you turn up, with the right intention, and you might not do it perfectly, but even little things like just creating a space where your community can come together and feel safe and find connection and bond. It's underestimated how incredibly powerful and how important that is for people. And I think sometimes when we think we want to change the world, we think we have to do these huge grand things, and we forget that
Right.
actually sometimes it can be the simplest thing, like being there for a child, and when you ask if they've had a good day, actually listening to them. And it's in those moments, those seeds, that actually the world is changed.
That's true. And like so, I know parents that will say, I don't like, and even adults, they'll say, yeah, it's hard for me to ask some of those questions, because what if they have an answer that I can't help, right?
Yeah,
Like, if somebody,
yeah,
sometimes I'll be with a student and they'll just go, yeah, I'm having a hard time because blank blank something happened, right?
yeah,
One of my parents is dying of
yeah,
of a
yeah,
disease or something. Or, oh, I just found out that we're moving or something, like. And
yeah,
And sometimes you just have, if you can, it's going to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Like you're going to sit there and you're going to go, yeah, we're sitting there with this like giant boulder that's like
Yeah.
slowly crushing us. And I know
Yeah.
that feeling. But at least if you do ask the question and you go, hey, I don't really know, that
Yeah.
sounds really hard. At least the person goes, hey, we're at least being crushed together.
Yeah.
And like,
Yeah.
you don't have to have the
Yeah.
answer. It's not about fixing it, but sometimes it's just about being present and saying, yeah, I could see how that could be a hard time. I tell lots of stories. I
Yeah.
just go, yeah, I remember when I moved like 7 times as a kid, and I go, yeah, man, every time I was just devastated. I was like
Yeah.
crying. I was like, I went through the stages I talk about the stages of grief,
Yeah.
like there's
Yeah.
like rage, and then there's like sadness, and then there's like bargaining and all. And I
Yeah.
go,
Yeah.
and so where are you at? And they're like, he's like, I'm at the sadness part. And I'm like, yeah, yeah, you're
Yeah.
gonna have the rage later. I said, your mom's gonna tell you to do something. You're gonna flip out and get angry. And he goes, yeah, I did that too for one of the things. And I'm like, yeah, well, that's just part of it. That welcome to humanity, man. Like this is how it's going to be, but you're going to get through it.
Yeah.
But man, man, people are work. Life is work. It's not, and
I think
and you're
what
right. It's
yeah.
100% what you get out of it is what you put into it.
Sometimes we're afraid to ask the questions, and I think it
Mhm.
links back to education, and we are just taught that basically like you need to know the answer. Like you need
Right,
to
right.
know the answer. Like, that's how you succeed in education is you have to have the answer. It's not about having that, asking the question. Asking the question is not that you've succeeded. And
Yeah.
I think that's the thing with like what you do is I think it's just reframing how we
Mhm.
show up in the world, isn't it? And you know learning that it's all right not to have the answers. Actually that's a place of power to be, to have the courage to sit there and ask a question and to even hear a question when you're like, I might not know how to answer this. And but do you know what? Like I've heard the question, I've listened to you, and maybe we go out together and we ask the question to someone else, and then we can find an answer that helps. And just having someone to share that burden with you is a way forward. And but you have to do that where you have to lift your eyes off the screen and you have to
Yes.
connect with the people around you. And yeah, and
Yeah.
I think that's what you create. To me, that's like your this forest education, the skills that you're creating is you're giving people that experience that like there is a
Right.
life beyond the screen. There is a life where you can be seen, you can be witnessed, you can be heard, which is hugely empowering. I mean, it's really, really is empowering for people. And yeah, and I feel like we're probably getting to the stage that we have to wrap up. And I think that's a really lovely message to leave people with, is just the fact that like don't be afraid of failure. Don't be afraid of not having the answers, and just ask the questions, take a step. We do live in this amazing world of technology where there's a good chance that you might hop on your phone and be able to find someone who can help you find the answer, and to take advantage of it. But I don't know if there's anything, Ricardo, that you would like to just leave us with as some final thoughts for today before we finish up.
Yeah. The only thing I would say is that, like, I think probably anybody listening to this podcast can think back to when they were younger, sometime in their life, where somebody was kind to them
Yeah.
and someone took the time to share something. Or I'm not talking about like some deep secret
Yeah.
formula or a
Yeah.
revelation, doorway into Narnia or something like that.
Yeah.
But really, like, we can all think of like our school experience and look back and go, oh, there was this one teacher, or there were these
Yeah.
two teachers who maybe they didn't even do it to me personally, but just the way they were in the classroom
Yeah.
and the stories they told and how vulnerable they were and everything helped me to feel understood or seen. Like, those the impact of that is very, very powerful. And we don't have to be a teacher in those scenarios. We can still have that impact, not just on the people, not just on like, young people, but anyone.
Yeah.
And right now, like, I really feel like when people are kind to each other, I mean, I get like choked up about that because it's just like, it's so hard right now in the world. People are struggling in a lot of ways. There's a lot of change. A lot of people are angry. A lot of people are frustrated. We're in a system that's not really designed for, it's not doing well,
No.
and we don't know what that other form is. And it's like a cocoon. We're trying to break out of this, but we don't even know what it's going to be like on the other side. And that's scary.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff going on. And within that, I just say, if we can get outside, if we can work together side by side, building something or making something that makes us feel good, and we can just be kind to each other and listen, man, like you'll have it all. Like ultimately, I don't know if there's anything better than that. And
that's how you change the world.
Yeah.
That's, it's one of those simple but not easy, but just kindness to other people.
That's what's going to help change the flow, hopefully.
Yeah.
But it's been a pleasure talking with you.
Oh, it's been fantastic. I've really, really enjoyed it. So thank you so much. I'll have in the podcast notes in the description. I'll share definitely your podcast, your websites, your your school programs. You also do a lot of work with other educators as well. That's the field that you've moved more into now, is working with educators, so that you're having an even bigger, greater input and impact, helping set them up to help more children. So I'll have all your details in the podcast show notes so people can connect with you and learn more, because I think you're an incredible man, and it's been an absolute privilege to have an hour speaking with you and just learn some of the wisdom that you've gathered from a lifetime dedicating yourself to education, to nature, and being of service in this world. So thank you so much, Ricardo, for everything that you're doing and you continue to do. And it's just people like you in the world just give me hope. So I'm really grateful to you for everything you do.
Well, I feel the same way, Fiona. You're fantastic. Everybody have a great day. Get outside.
Go. Turn off the podcast and go and spend some time in nature.
There you go.
Thank you so much for listening to the Nurtured by Nature podcast. I truly hope this conversation has brought some hope and inspiration into your life. I would love to have these messages ripple out across the world. So if you can, please share this episode with your friends, leave a review on your favourite podcast player, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. I would love to hear from you, so please feel free to connect with me on the links provided in the podcast description. But most importantly, thank you so much for being a part of this journey with me. But don't forget to simply get out there and enjoy the natural world.